Our pal Reiner Sabin from the Detroit Free Press, formerly of AL.com, joins us this morning to kick off the show. And what a unique perspective Reiner has on this Citrus Bowl. Good morning, buddy. How are you?
Good. How you doing?
Doing great, man. Good to talk to you. You were on the Alabama beat, of course, for several years. You started this season on the Alabama beat. You finished it on the Michigan beat for the Detroit Free Press after moving over there from AL.com. So, as I said, you got quite a perspective on this game coming up January 1st in Orlando, and you've already written an article that I thought was outstanding about this game and the fact that for Michigan, this is a great opportunity for Harbaugh and the Wolverines, while for Alabama, it's seen, quite frankly, as a disappointment and a game that Sabin's really going to have to use all of his motivational skills to get Alabama ready to play. You've been on both beats this season. Why do you find it to be so?
Well, I mean, I just think that, again, for Alabama, I mean, it's got to be a huge disappointment. I mean, you make the college football playoff every year since inception in 2014, and then you're left out. And not only do you not make the playoff, you don't even get to a New Year's Six-Day Bowl, and then you kind of have to play, in Orlando in a non-New Year's Six Bowl for the first time since 2010. And so I just think for Alabama's perspective, it's just not it's just got to be a huge letdown. Whereas for Michigan, it's a chance for them to kind of reset the view of their season after they got steamrolled by Ohio State in the final game and lost to the Buckeyes for the 8th year in a row. So, I just think that the matchup itself tends to favor Michigan in that sense. As far as talent, there's no question Alabama is far and away the better team in this matchup.
Harbaugh came in with much fanfare and really was brought in, and the fan base there at Michigan expected Sabin-type results.
Sure.
Reiner, yeah, it hasn't happened, and he's 0-5 against Ohio State. Now, Michigan's been good. They've been good every year. In fact, you could say they've been a very good football team, but they haven't done what they brought him in to do, which was to beat Ohio State and to get in a position to get into a playoff and play for a national championship. It really is kind of been the case for some time. In fact, Reiner, and I'm interested how you view this, a lot of people are saying, well, Michigan should be competing for national titles. Michigan should be beating Ohio State occasionally. But you could argue that this is what the Michigan program has been for quite some time. I mean, I know Lloyd Carr had the one national title, but Schembechler never won one. They haven't won that many in the last 50 years. And maybe this is more of who Michigan really is, other than what the perception of Michigan is, that it is an Ohio State or an Alabama or a Oklahoma or those type of programs. You see where I'm going with this? Is this more or less who Michigan's become?
That's an outstanding point. I totally agree with that. I think that's very accurate. I think that's what Michigan is. I mean, I think they're cut below the elite programs in the country. And, there's this weird mentality here in Ann Arbor that they're kind of like, characterized as an exceptionalist mentality, like they're somewhat different than everybody else. And there is some element to that. I mean, they do have high academic standards and such, and they, try to sell the idea that, they play by the rules and that kind of thing. But but at the end of the day, the fans still demand that they compete at the national championship level, right. And they expect that, which, I don't, based on the history and the track record of, like you said, the last 50 years. I mean, and you made a great point that Schembechler, who's idolized here, never won a national championship, is revered in the same sense here as Bear Bryant is down in Tuscaloosa, which is fascinating to me. And they just have not won at the level that Alabama has, and yet there is some strange undercurrent that exists here that they feel like that should be the case, that they should be, playing against an Alabama, a Clemson, at the end of the season. And in this case, they are, but not in the type of game that they want to be in.
Exactly. And I want to get into more of the Harbaugh versus Sabin in just a moment. But this season, the two teams do parallel each other. I mean, Michigan has 9-3. The three football teams they lost to are all really good teams: Penn State, Wisconsin, and Ohio State. Alabama's 10-2, but lost to the two best teams that it played, LSU
right.
and Auburn. So that's very similar seasons, and as you said, though, but different perspective. For Michigan, this is a great opportunity to really land a blow for Harbaugh, for the program, for the perception. And for Alabama, you're right, it's more or less, boy, there's a lot of pressure to win this game, because if we don't win it, we're going to catch major heat. But if Alabama wins the game, nobody's going to raise an eyebrow. So there's a lot here for Michigan in terms of, if you were a gambler, you know, they've got the odds on their side. They've got a bigger opportunity. Alabama's having to lay odds, and if Alabama wins, it's just kind of a relief. And if Michigan's wins, this is something they could really carry into next season.
True. The question is just how many players, are going to be available for Alabama.
Yep.
If Alabama has, again, most of that receiving core, and, say Najee Harris plays, it could be a rough day for Michigan, because they got physically manhandled by Ohio State's offensive line, and the defensive line just didn't measure up against them, and that's the type of offensive line they're going to face, against Alabama. And then, the receivers didn't, which is their strength, their receiving core, got pretty much limited by Ohio State secondary. I could see the same thing happening to some extent with Alabama's secondary too. So I just think that from a talent perspective, if Alabama has most of the players and they seem like they're raring to go, it could be a long day for Michigan. The question is whether Michigan gets to face a kind of undermanned or just less impressive Alabama team, and then I think they have a fighting chance. But if it's just the two rosters matched up together, there's no question that Alabama should have the advantage in the game. The motivation again should be on Michigan's side, but I don't know if that's enough to overcome the talent differential.
Reiner, I'm interested in your perspective on the two rivalries, Michigan, Ohio State, and Alabama, Auburn, since you've covered both. And I've given Auburn a lot of credit. They have managed to keep this a rivalry against Alabama, up against one of the great dynasties in college football history. They've won their share. And,
sure.
They've won a national championship, played for another. They've stayed relevant. Whereas the rivalry that you now are covering, I can't call it a rivalry. I think it's a big game. I think it's an important game. And I know you're talking about two different states, but still the animosity between Ohio State and Michigan fans is right up there with Alabama and Auburn. But I can't imagine if Sabin had come in here, and it didn't happen, but if Sabin had come in here and lost his first 5 games to Auburn, I don't know that he'd have gotten a 6th season, regardless of what he had done. Harbaugh's won a lot of games, but he's 0-5. Of course, Michigan's lost 17 of 18. The rivalries are different. How do Michigan fans, how do you handle that? I can't imagine if Alabama, it was bad enough when they lost 6 in a row. If you lose 17 of 18, how do they come to grips with that? How do they manage to continue to believe that they're relevant in the rivalry when their only win is when Luke Fickell was an interim coach at Ohio State in the last 18 games?
It's a good question. Having covered both games, there is an intense hatred, more so, I think, between the programs at Michigan and Ohio State than Alabama, Auburn. I think there's a respect level with Alabama, Auburn, right, within the programs. The fans, not so much. I think the fans really drive the Alabama, Auburn rivalry. It's 365 days, on the comment section on AL.com and such, or anywhere else, they're talking about, Alabama, Auburn. Whereas Michigan, Ohio State, you don't get that sense among the fans, but you do get the sense that there's a real dislike between the programs. And, Ohio State wouldn't even refer to Michigan by its name. And, Jim Harbaugh seems somewhat dismissive of the rivalry. It's just another game. And perhaps that's, how they've been able to kind of compartmentalize, what's going on in the rivalry. But, it definitely sticks in Michigan fans, craw that they can't beat their rival, and the fact that Ohio State has just dominated them in the last couple games too. It's just, I think it drives them, nuts in a lot of ways. But I don't think they see a pathway out because Ohio State seems to be just stockpiling better talent, and they just see that this thing kind of continuing going forward. I mean, Michigan fans are a bit beaten down, I think, by it at this point.
Yeah, that's been my perception, is that at this point it doesn't seem you want to win the game, but I don't think Harbaugh's catching too much heat because, again, Michigan fans are saying no matter who we bring in, it's going to be hard to beat Ohio State with what they're doing. This opportunity between the coaches, there was a little, when Harbaugh got into college football in Michigan, back into college football, he kind of had a little Lane Kiffin in him. He was poking the bear a little bit, and he was, he was trying to kind of get some people stirred up. And of course, the satellite camps, and he and Sabin had a little bit of a back and forth. There's no doubt that Sabin is the man. I mean, he is the guy in college football. I believe watching Harbaugh, he relishes this opportunity, although I think they're probably going to say the right things leading up to the game. I know they don't know each other that well, but do you think there is just some animosity in terms of style? I mean, Sabin says it's never personal, but I think both of these coaches are going to be competitive enough with each other that this is going to be an important game for them. You agree?
Oh, yeah, I totally agree with that. I think Harbaugh would love to beat somebody like Sabin. I mean, he's kind of made references that Alabama, again, has these advantages and they don't always play by the rules, and, not just Alabama, but
SEC.
The SEC, Clemson, those kind of programs. And so he feels like he operates on a different level. He's kind of created this idea, or just tried to put it in people's heads that Michigan is somehow above that and doesn't stoop to that level, as he would probably put it. But it's and then, he, like you said, he does like to poke the bear. Usually he does that from, again, he's at a lower level than Sabin. So he takes what you said was the kind of Kiffin tactics, where he just kind of, takes on the big guy in the room. And so Sabin is that. As for Sabin, I think he does would love nothing more than to beat Michigan. This goes back to his days at Michigan State.
Sure.
I don't think he really liked Michigan ever. I think it goes back even to when he was an assistant at Ohio State. I mean, this guy was built to not like Michigan, and I think that's still in his blood to this day, because I think he has. He generally refers to Michigan State as, very fondly from what I've seen and heard from him over the years. And so I think he carries that with him into this game, the fact that, he did like his time at Michigan State, and also that, during those years he geared up to, face Michigan. I mean, his protege, Mark D'Antonio, hates Michigan with a passion, and that's kind of been the fuel that has allowed them to beat the Wolverines and kind of at least make it a rivalry in state that when it never really existed before he got there, even when Sabin was there. I mean, Sabin, part of the reason why Sabin went to LSU was because he knew he couldn't overcome the advantage that Michigan had.
That's right.
So he went to LSU, where he saw a golden opportunity in a state, probably one of the most fertile recruiting areas, but that's the only school in major Power 5 school in that state. And so that's part of the reason why he went to the SEC in the first place, was the kind of disadvantage that he faced going against Michigan, just from a recruiting perspective.
Ryder, I know you've got to get to an interview, so I'm not going to keep you much longer. But when you look at Harbaugh, and there's been so much speculation about Sabin since he's been here, Harbaugh's got a very good NFL resume. How much longer? I know he's a competitor. He digs his heels in, man. There's no doubt about that. how much longer do you think he wants to fight this fight? I mean, if he can't get past the Ohio State hump, is he going to be a long-termer at Michigan, or do you think he'll look to move on sooner rather than later? What do you think his future is?
Well, it's a good question. I mean, I have a hard time figuring it out myself, but I mean, I think his value in the NFL has been reduced by, yes, yeah, because I mean, they're looking to bring college offenses into the NFL. He comes from a pro-style background. Right. That's what he is. And the other knock on Harbaugh during his tenure at Michigan is that he hasn't been able to develop a quarterback.
Sure.
So, like, the thing that his level of expertise was in quarterback play, and he's the best player that he has had at quarterback was Jake Rudock, and he was a transfer from Iowa. So he hasn't been able to develop anybody. I mean, Shea Patterson obviously is a transfer from Ole Miss, and he's the quarterback now. And so it's just been a real problem, a real mystery to, I know, NFL personnel people I've talked to about why Harbaugh hasn't been able to develop players at that position. And, I think it's a big knock on him. And so I don't see him having as much value other than his name and, the track record he had in San Francisco. But I don't see him necessarily being able to be that successful, even if he goes back to the NFL. And maybe he's thinking along those lines too, that maybe, the coaching position at Michigan is a safer bet at this point, even if he does lose to Ohio State. I mean, I can't see a scenario where Michigan moves on from him because they know it could get a lot worse. I mean, they've seen that. It's not that far. They're not far removed from it at all with Rick Rodriguez and Brady Hoke.
Wrapping up with Reiner Sabin, a lot of unknowns, as you said, with Alabama in regards to who's going to play in the game, and it's still a few weeks out. Who do you like, Michigan or Alabama?
Well, I mean, I'm going to go with Alabama. I mean, I just think they're just far and away more talented across the board. And, again, you had the added factor of Sabin being probably extra motivated too, just because it's Michigan. If it was Utah or Hawaii or some one of those teams, I don't think he would be, had the same level of motivation. But Michigan kind of probably fires him up. So there are a couple of things that I think definitely favor Alabama in this game. And, again, if it was a college football playoff matchup and these two teams were facing, there's no doubt I would pick Alabama to, roll by a lot. I mean, it would be a huge margin I would pick, especially if the stakes were higher. So, but considering that you just look at the rosters and the talent level, I just, that Alabama has, I mean, I just think that the Crimson Tide will just probably win this game.
Well, I can't let you out of here without, thinking a little Peaches and her reunited. You and Sabin shared some great moments in your time as the beat writer for AL.com. Are you looking forward to being reunited with the coach down in Orlando?
I actually like dealing with Sabin at times. I mean, he's, gave better answers in a lot of ways than Harbaugh. Although I did make both coaches go viral this season, which I'm probably the only person who's ever done that. I was the one who asked him about Sabin, obviously, about the scheduling and after the Mexico State game. And, he made the comment about, well, why don't you go find some opponents for us to play? And then later in the season, I asked Harbaugh about what, where this team was at and how they improved. And he made that remark about you can't plant potatoes one day and have potato salad the next. So both of those things got picked up on ESPN and went viral. So I'm probably the only reporter who's, caused Sabin and Harbaugh at least to go viral in the same season.
It shows you're good at your job. Who's more fun to cover, Sabin or Harbaugh? Who's more fun?
I actually like Sabin. Yeah, I mean, and he's also much more accessible, strangely enough. You wouldn't think that, but Harbaugh only talks to the media once a week, and he does his radio show in Like, he doesn't go out in public like Sabin does, and so he's a lot more closed off and cloistered than Sabin is. So Sabin's actually probably a little bit more accessible to the media. It certainly is with the national folks too.
Great perspective, Reiner. Really have enjoyed it. Folks, I know a lot of you still follow Reiner on Twitter from his days covering Alabama, but it's at Reiner Sabin, at RainerSabin. A great opportunity to read his coverage leading up to the Citrus Bowl game between Alabama and Michigan. Man, I appreciate the time, buddy. It was fun.
Yeah, it was really, really good. I really appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
Hey, everybody at the Y, everybody at the Tuscaloosa Y misses you, man.
I do miss it there. It's actually the Y there is better than the Y here. Yeah.
All right, buddy. Good to catch up. Take care.
All right. Take it easy.